Hi everyone, it's week 2. I apologize for the earlier video with the audio problems, so we're going to re-record the video. Hopefully that'll make it easier to follow along. So what we want to talk about today is how do we get data on the web, and then how do we capture it, how do we process it, how do we save it so that we can store it for later. So I like to think of this process as kind of like shopping for groceries, in a way that we go to the store, we go to a website, we collect all the things we want, and then we're done. We process it all at once. And we've got to go through this process. We can't just walk into the store, fill our cart with groceries, and walk out. We've got to do some things before we're allowed to walk out of there. So the first thing we need whenever we want to get information from our users, and it could be anything, it could be we're letting them sign up, we're letting them review a product, we're letting them make a posting. We need some way to collect the information they want to give us. And the way we do this is with an HTML form. Pretty much impossible in a browser to get information from users unless we're giving them some kind of form. And typically down at the bottom, we're going to see a submit button, a way for them to indicate to us that they're done giving us all the inputs they need. In terms of the HTML, you probably would have learned seen some of these tags in your Web and Internet Fundamentals course. We're always going to have an opening and closing set of form tags, and all of the inputs are going to live inside of these opening and closing tags. We also will specify an attribute of our opening form tag of method, and we're going to give that a value of post. And we'll look later why we use post instead of our other option, which is get. The other attribute we're typically going to want to add is the action attribute. So action will tell the browser which page is going to load next, and that page is going to, in effect, receive or catch all of the inputs the user submitted on their form. We don't have to include this attribute. We can leave it out, and you'll see some PHP code samples that leave that attribute out. If we leave that attribute out, the form will post back to itself. Some developers prefer that. I don't like that method. I just find it's too messy. I'd rather have two separate pages, one for collecting the data and then a separate action page for processing the data. And it's critical, if we're going to use PHP to process the form inputs, our action page has got to have a PHP extension. And then our form is going to have separate inputs, as you can see in our little diagram, for each of the values we want our user to give us. And then down at the bottom, we'll have a way for them to trigger that form submission, which will send the data, take the data from their browser and submit it to the web server so we can process it. We have all kinds of different form controls available. Single line text inputs would be the ones we use most commonly. If we want to give our users options, we can give them drop-down lists or radio buttons, checkboxes for yes, no fields, text areas when we want a large block of text, such as an address or a description. So part of designing intelligent web user interfaces is matching the controls to the types of inputs we need and making it as easy as possible for users to fill out our forms. For example, something like a city, we could give the user a text box for city. If we can put those cities in a drop-down list, so much the better. That way our list is standard and we won't get different versions of the same values. So ultimately, when our HTML form is done, we need to send it off to a server-side scripting language. Could be PHP, which is what we're going to use. Could be C#, could be Java, could be something else. And we're going to use that server-side scripting language to perform the logic and process the values. One of the most common things we do with our inputs is we then connect to a database and we save that data so that we have it permanently. For example, this is what happens anytime you make a Facebook post. Facebook gives you a box to type a new post in. You have a post button. That button sends the content of your post to the web server, where it connects to Facebook's database and dumps your post into the database so all of your friends can see that post on their news feed. It will also show up on your wall. So we need some way, when users submit forms, we need a way to be able to identify each individual input. So in PHP, if we use a post method on our form, all of the inputs are going to be part of a collection or an array called $_post. So this is a built-in object that exists in the PHP code library. So the way that we refer to any individual input is $_post, square bracket, and then in single quotes, the name of the input field. So when we create forms, and we create inputs, we want to give every input a descriptive name. We don't want to call them input 1, input 2, input 3, because we need to know whether an input holds a username, password, or some other kind of value. So in this case, I would name my input first_name, and I'm going to take that value and store it in a local variable. So most of the time, we're going to want to store the inputs users give us into a database. So one of the first steps is we're going to have to go and create a table in our database that contains all of the inputs, all the fields we want to capture from our users. So the usual workflow is we're going to go and figure out what information we want, build a table in the database. You're learning how to do this in your relational database course. We'll set up that table. Then we're going to build our form that has input fields to match the database. And lastly, we're going to build a PHP page that will accept all our form inputs, process each one, and save the individual values. And we're going to use an SQL insert command, which you're learning in your database course. So for step one, you've got some scripts on Blackboard that will create an insert table for you. By now, you should be starting to get familiar with how to connect to your MySQL database. You can either use the SQL.Computer Studies website and log in, or you can use the MySQL Workbench, which is a free download, to connect to your database. Then we're going to build our form, and we're going to capture our form inputs, connect to the database, set up and execute our command to insert the database and disconnect. So let's take a look at how some of these forms work. So I'm going to up my code editor. Today I'm going to use a different code editor. I'm going to use PHP Storm. The link to this is on Blackboard. It's from JetBrains. If you've used IntelliJ before, PHP Storm is made by this developer, so you'll be comfortable with it. It comes with a 30-day free trial, but if you register and you let them know you're a student, they will extend your trial for 365 days. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to make a folder for today. I already have a COMP1006 folder I made last week. I'm going to make a lesson 2 folder. And then I'm going to open up this folder in my PHP Storm. If you're using a different code editor, that's fine. So we're going to build a couple of pages. We're going to build a simple input form, and then we're going to build a PHP page that will process that form input. And I'm just going to run this on my local server for today. If you have a local web server installed, that's great. That'll save you time. If you're going to be uploading to DreamHost or Azure, that's fine too. So inside my lesson 2 folder, I'm going to go ahead and create a PHP file. I'll call email form. The name of my page doesn't really matter. And I'll change the page title. Say enter your email. I'll wipe out the default code that's here. So what we want to do is put on a form tag. And as I mentioned in the slides, we're going to add 2 attributes to our form. We're going to add a method, post. Notice I get a couple options here. I have post or get. We're going to use post. Later on, I'll change mine to get, and you can see the difference between post and get. And we're also going to set up an action, which will be show email.php. So this page, which we'll create in a minute, this is in effect going to catch the results of our form submission. And then on here, we'll put on a label. Some instructions to enter your email address. And then we'll put on just a single line text box so we can use input. We have to give this a name. So we want to name it descriptively. We don't want to call it input one or text one. We should give it a name of email. We're also going to give it an ID of email. I'll end my input. And the last thing we're going to do is use a button. We have a label, a text box, and a submit button. Now I could upload this to the web server and run it. I'm just going to run it using my local server today. I'll browse into my COMP1006 lesson 2 folder. Here's my email form. So notice we get a single line text box and a submit button. The form itself is not visible. The form is really just a container. So I can enter in some email address, enter my Georgian email, and when I hit submit, I get a 404 page not found error. This is okay. The reason is it's trying to load our show email page, which is what we want, but this page doesn't yet exist. I'm just going to make one other change on my form. I want to show you the difference between post and get. If I change my method to get, go back and refresh my page, still get my form. It looks the same, but now when I submit, notice it takes the email value I've entered in the form and it puts it as part of my URL. So typically we don't want to do this. Imagine that we had a username and password. Well, by using get in our form, our password is going to show up in our address bar, totally insecure. Now we want to specify post. What happens if I leave that attribute out altogether? If I don't specify whether we're doing a post or get, and I submit, notice the default method is get. So my form inputs will show up as part of my address bar unless I specifically declare my form method as post. So in this course, whenever we create forms, very rare exception, we're going to want to use post instead. That way the form inputs don't show up as part of our address. So now we put it back to post. And our page is loading show email and sending our form input. So now we just need to build show email. So I'm going to create a new PHP file. We have to name it show email because that's the page our form is trying to load. Title. Now we're going to put on some PHP tags so we can process our form with server-side script. So the first thing I'm going to do is create and fill a local variable from the form input. I'm going to create a variable called email. And now we're going to use our post array. So what needs to go in here is the name attribute of my input, which is called email. Now I want to display a message that includes the email address entered on the last page. I'm going to use the PHP echo command. So your email is, leave a space, and now I'm going to use PHP's really weird concatenate operator. In most other languages, that operator is a plus sign, which makes sense. In PHP, for some bizarre reason, the concatenate operator is a dot. And I'm going to add on my email variable, terminate my command with a semicolon. So I've written this using single quotes. We'll look at the difference between single and double quotes in just a minute. I'm going to go back to my browser, go back and submit again. And now show email loads this time, and it says your email is, and it shows me the input I entered. If I want to go back and change it to something else, whatever value is submitted on the form that value is properly being picked up and displayed on my show email page. Now, we're going to show the message using double quotes instead. The advantage of using double quotes in our PHP echo commands is we can actually embed the variables right inside the quotes rather than appending on. But it would look something like this. So we don't need the concatenate operator. We can just inject that variable directly inside of our double quotes. Let's see how this looks. So now when I refresh, I'm going to resubmit my form. And we actually get the exact same output twice. So it works the same with double or single quotes. This version with double quotes seems a little bit easier. We can skip the concatenate operator, that's true. However, later on, if we add HTML tags inside of our strings, we're going to want to use single quotes. So for now, you can use either one.